Morning, Bill.
Good morning, Mark. What a beautiful day.
A glorious day. And today, by the time this goes to the air, we will know who the Geelong Business Excellence Award for the best business in Geelong is.
That's right.
And all the other categories as well. So big night and an exciting night.
Well, tonight's a big night. I've got a big lunch. I've got the Hoops business lunch at the Cats, right? And then dinner at the Pier tonight for the presentation awards.
Which I think there's over 550 odd people going to it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good effort. All right, Mark, this morning we are actually re-interviewing Scott Andersen, who was Director Partner of Worrells here in Geelong.
Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for having me along.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to this. And a special reason why we asked Scott to come on, and it's because of every time you pick up the papers, look at the news, listen to the radio, whatever, we keep hearing about the economic downturn. We keep hearing about people cut back on spending, and there's all sorts of commentary and statistics out there. But in the real world, someone like Scott from Worrells, who are insolvency practitioners and liquidation specialists, Scott's right at the forefront, and he's seeing the impact of this right now, particularly in the regions, and it's mainly in the small to medium enterprise part.
So, Scott, you're one of the, dare I say, the benefits of the economy, because there's one man's meat is another man's poisson, as they say. So, to kick off, Scott, what are you seeing in the economy? What's the sort of the increase in insolvencies? Are they increasing?
Mark, they certainly are. I think for September, as an example, the volume of insolvencies was about 40% above the historical trend.
Wow.
So there's a bit of there's certainly been an uptick in the last 6 to 12 months. It's just undeniable.
And what across what industries, Scott? What are you seeing it across?
Hospitality's probably suffering the greatest at the moment. It's probably a product of pressures on discretionary spending and household disposable income. Building and construction, it's been in the media quite a bit. Admittedly, building construction's typically got traditionally had relatively a higher sort of volume of insolvencies just by nature of the industry, but it's coming out of COVID. It's certainly been a hard period for people in building and construction. Another one is transport. Transport businesses have got a lot of costs which are just within the business structure. There's large capital outlays for big trucks and trailer sets, and then there's typically finance on those, but then you've got to add the fluctuation in their biggest cost centre, which will be their fuel.
Yep. And
obviously there's some pretty high wages growth pressure as well. So it's hard to recalibrate for a transport business because obviously you sell a vehicle to access some working capital, and if it's under finance, well, then you've got to pay out the bank.
Yep.
And then you obviously pick up some redundancy expenditure on the way through as well. So it's quite challenging to reset.
And are you seeing it? Is there a difference between regions and city, or is it sort of across the board?
I think it's probably a two-factor economy. Like in Victoria, sort of look at the regions, and there's still a bit of strength in the regions.
Yep.
I think we've been quite fortunate to benefit from the move that happened. Let's call it the sea or the tree change that happened during COVID. So I think the regions are probably the insolvency levels aren't quite as high as what would be in metropolitan Melbourne. We've also got, I think Victoria's probably been a little bit fortunate as well, and this might be a controversial comment, is that the state government admittedly has spent a lot of money on infrastructure.
Yep.
And I think Victoria as a state economy is probably not experiencing the same volume of insolvencies as what our interstate counterparts are, because of just the level of infrastructure spending that government's undertaken.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, Scott, that doesn't help a lot of small businesses, does it? But the other issue, you mentioned the ATO before. So how significant has the ATO been? Because you've advised that, of course, they're now dealing with the outstanding balances and issues, which a lot of it came out of COVID. So how's that affecting everything?
Well, to put it into context, is prior to COVID, is that on an annual basis, the ATO would have been responsible for winding up anywhere up to about, let's say, 1,500 companies a year. So then you look at the statistics for the 2-year period where we're in the heart of the pandemic, is the ATO essentially stopped recoveries, and that was to obviously support business because they couldn't be seen to be winding them up whilst the federal government was assisting businesses. And the ATO reduced their winding up proceedings to almost zero over that 24-month period. So then you fast forward to now, and September as the most contemporary example I can give you is that the ATO had a historically high number of winding up applications made in September 2024.
And is that a bit of catch up then, Scott?
There's definitely catch up in it. We've just got to have a look at some of the statistics about what the ATO's owed at the moment. So prior to COVID, they probably owed about $25 billion in collectible debt. Fast forward to 30 June 2023, that increased to a whopping $50.2 billion of collectible debt.
Wow.
And then Christmas time, 2023, that's continued to increase to $52.2 billion of collectible debt. Now, of that, about $33.4 billion of that collectible debt is owed by about 500,000 small businesses. And then you extrapolate that data even further, is that 10 billion of that 33.4 is actually only owed by 42,000 small businesses.
Wow.
So it is quite concentrated, but the numbers are just massive at the moment. And that's why the ATO has had to change their approach. So they obviously in COVID adopted a support approach, whereas now they've recognised that because of that debt book increasing, and like any business, they've got to collect on their accounts receivable, and that's what they're doing.
Yep.
So, Scott, if you're a director or a small business or business operator and or director, and you know deep down that you're staring in the face of some issues coming forward, what should be these business owners be looking at, and how should they be planning to approach getting out of this financial issue?
That's a very good question. For any director out there, the first step would be to reach out to your trusted business advisor, whether it be people similar to yourselves who are well experienced in business, your accountant, or whomever that person would be. Sit down and talk through the issues and do an assessment as to whether or not the business is fundamentally viable. Now, that assessment then sort of suggests which path that you take, because if the business isn't fundamentally viable, then and the business model may not be appropriate, because things do change, well, then you've got to start looking at your options early, because if the business isn't fundamentally viable and you're slow to take action, the protection that you're afforded by a corporate entity or a corporate trustee in a family trust, as an example, you can lose that just by the passage of time and not doing things quickly enough. And so by neglecting to attend to a problem, you can inadvertently expose your personal assets to the risks of the debt that the company may be accumulating. Then on the other hand as well, if the business is fundamentally viable, but for, let's say, a short-term cash flow crisis or some other factors, such as a customer unfortunately going into insolvency, not being able to pay their debt due, is acting early by seeking advice is that you can deploy options to restructure the debts or overcome that short-term problem in a method which preserves the longevity of the business.
So when do you get called in, Scott? When do you guys the phone call comes into your office saying, we've got a problem? When does that happen?
It varies a lot. Admittedly, I get called in very late. So, for example, when a statutory demand is essentially about to expire,
yep.
And that's sometimes problematic because there's not a great deal that we can do in that situation because I don't have a great deal of runway to fix a problem. Or alternatively, I might get called in 6-12 months in advance of any sort of formal appointment occurring. And what that means is through conversations that I have with directors and their accountants or other trusted business advisors is we can ideally work through a situation without me even having to be formally involved. But then if a formal appointment is required to happen, there's been a dialogue to make sure that steps have been taken which are in the best interests of the company, which in turn are in the best interests of its creditors as well.
So that's the best option then, I would suggest. If someone thinks they're in strife, looks like they're in strife, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, give you a yell?
Absolutely. Just because, and I find this quite interesting, is that there is a perception out there that just by having a conversation with the likes of myself or a colleague means that the future is locked in, that you're going to end up in some sort of insolvency proceeding, but it's quite the opposite. It's just about providing information so that way the right decisions are made. Well, for all the conversations I have, they probably don't actually yield in a formal engagement of my services in 50% of the time.
And on past conversations with you, you'd rather see a business thrive and grow than fold up and disappear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly because I live in the Geelong community.
Yep.
Children enjoy going to school here. I'm a participant in the local community, and you want to see the continued growth of Geelong and success, because it's a beautiful city, beautiful region, and there's a lot of great businesses in the area that will survive and continue to thrive.
Yeah. And are there any sort of key signals that you look for when you step into a business? Is it, if you get in on an early basis, is there, arrears in superannuation, or what are the things, the triggers that you look at and go, hang on a sec, guys, you're going to have a problem?
Yeah, superannuation is certainly one of those. Other ones would be trade credit accounts sort of being at their limits or close to it, coupled with that threats of being put on COD, so cash on delivery.
Yep.
You've got bank facilities being maxed out. Then there's other kind of indicators that can show that a problem is either very close to materialising or it's already passed. things such as non-bank lenders or short-term financiers with high interest rates being accessed for short-term working capital solutions. They're all factors that come into play. Look, admittedly as well, people not lodging either tax returns or alternatively lodging their BASs with the tax office, because there is a perception that if we don't lodge them, then the ATO won't pursue us because they won't know what they're owed.
That's a bit short-sighted, really, isn't it?
And Scott, they've got a thing called computers. Right?
Well, that's exactly right. But even more so is that you then fall foul of the timing of lodgements, and you then become exposed to the director penalty regime, which means that if the company can't ultimately pay the sum of the BASs once they've been lodged, is that the directors become permanently responsible for the net GST and pay-as-you-go withholding of that BAS if it's been lodged more than 3 months after the due date. And unfortunately, that happens quite a lot.
Is there a percentage where it's pure incompetence or fraud, where someone set up the business, is enjoying a nice lifestyle, and then just collapses the business, and the old Phoenix can, they pop themselves back up with a different name and the same client base, and off they go again?
No. I would, and I'm just sort of, this is my experience.
Yep.
Is I think willful neglect, fraud, or just or impropriety would be in the significant minority.
Yeah, good.
It's more about people having a go. Unfortunately, things don't go as planned, and having to seek assistance to take the step to sort of right the ship.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think back to my days working in the hardware and timber industry, and young builders would set themselves up. They'd build a house. They'd suddenly get this big cash flow when they completed the build. Their account owed to the business was way in arrears, and they drive in a new ute, and they'd just been to Bali. And you'd go, guys, what about fixing up your account? Oh, yeah, we'll get to that. It was all about the moment for
Now, Scott, I'm going to give you a crystal ball and get your opinion on where you think the economy is going. Right now, I think we're sort of 1990 all over again, is my sort of summary of it. But casting forward, and if we were having this discussion this time next year, what do you think would be the economic position?
Well,
I'm not holding you to this. I'm not writing it down. No one's listening, right?
Polish the crystal ball.
From past experience, my crystal ball is pretty opaque, or it's broken. So I'll have a go at answering this one, and we can revisit my response in 2025. Without being overly vague, I think that it's next year, or the economic outlook is going to be dependent on, or the business outlook is going to be dependent on probably 3 or 4 key factors. The question will be, are we at the top of the interest rate cycle at the moment? Because if we are, I think then there will be a bit more positive outlook and sentiment. Then to contradict that or bring that optimism down a peg or two is the ATO is going to be a key player in the future of the business economy, because, as I was saying, they're owed such a significant amount of money, and they do need to recover that, like any business, as the government needs to run the economy would have to do. So I think we're probably at the peril of the levers that the ATO will pull. Now, with that as well, is that the tax office has recently announced that they are going to increase their collection activities even more. They're going to become, as of January, February next year, even less patient with recovery timeframes as well. They've essentially come out and suggested that they're going to halve the time that they're prepared to extend people that haven't paid debts to pay.
Wow.
And so they're going to essentially instigate firmer collection activity in a more expeditious manner than what they've historically done. So I think that's going to be a key contributor to it. I think the other factor to bear in mind here is, and this would be in the hospitality sense as well, and retail, mind you, if people have got more disposable income, I think hospitality and retail will begin to thrive again. At the moment, I think both industries are in a state of tightness, because it's clear to everyone that with or without a mortgage, that it's things are expensive at the moment, and with that as well, if you don't have much spending or discretionary spend, is you're not going out for those social events or grabbing that cup of coffee or buying those random things off the shelves as you walk past a shop.
Yep.
And so I think they're probably the key three factors. So my crystal ball would say, unless there's a change in the macroeconomic environment and with the ATO expediting firmer collection activities, I think we're probably going to be seeing the same level of insolvencies as we are this time next year.
So,
as unfortunate it is to sort of have that view.
But it's reality, Scott. That's the
reality.
issue. Yeah.
So Scott,
well, that's right.
So Scott, if I'm sitting in a little business, let's say a hospitality cafe, etc., what are a couple of signs that you would point out that they need to be looking at to start this process, to be aware they don't go belly up? What are the couple of things that you would immediately say go and look at or check?
Well, I think you'd have the three key things in a hospitality business are going to be your sales, whether or not they're sort of heading in the right direction or at least remaining steady.
Yep.
And then your cost of goods and your wages. If your cost of goods are increasing to an extent that's out of control, because obviously that's going to contribute to your gross profit margin. If they're going in the wrong direction and it's eroding your gross profit margin, well, you need to immediately have a look at the broader viability. And then in terms of the net profit margin, I think the largest imposition on hospitality businesses is going to be the costs of payroll.
Yep.
And I think if those three aren't heading in the right direction, then you've got to take a very close look at the business viability. If it is viable, but say for example you've got again, this is a common theme for the conversation, a tax debt, speak to your accountant, because there are some pretty effective solutions to deal with that. I mean, small business restructures is something that I've been doing quite a lot of. It's essentially a process where you can force your unsecured creditors to take a haircut. And with those unsecured creditors, you'll find it fascinating that the statistics around small business restructures is that the tax office is either the majority or sole creditor in 85% of small business restructures. And at least from my experience, the ATO has been accepting a proposal in at least 90 to 95% of those proposals that I'm presenting to them.
Right.
So there are solutions.
That's good, Scott. And we have reached the end of our session. I've got 100 more questions, but they'll have to wait.
And Scott, because whoever's listening to this will obviously have an interest one way or the other, how do they get in touch with you guys? What's the best place to find you?
They can jump on our website, so worrells.net.au. We're We're a Victorian and national business. Anyone can reach out to myself or one of my colleagues. We're always more than happy to help and have a very empathetic approach to situations, because each individual has a very unique situation, and we're very mindful of that.
And you'd rather hear earlier than later.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Scott. That's brilliant. Thank you for all the information, and hopefully businesses listening will follow through on that great advice you've provided.
Yeah, great to talk to you again, Scott, and I hope that you're not too busy to get on the golf course, which I know that you love, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and enjoy this evening, and good luck to all the nominees for the Geelong Business Excellence Awards. Hope it's a great evening, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.